Hi! So I am sitting on the floor of my bedroom right now so that I could record some of my thoughts, reflections, and musings, not only as a compliance for my subject, which is literature, which I'll get to in a bit, but to also capture my thoughts at this period of my life, which entails a lot of change and transition from one era to another. So before I start, I'll just like to introduce myself. Hi, I am Romian Grace V. Gonzalez. I am a fourth year and graduating student in De La Salle University, Manila, taking up Bachelor's of Science in Psychology with a minor in Sociology, Sports Health. And right now, I'm about to dive deep into a synthesis of what I've learned in literature. But beyond that, I also want to share a lot of my thoughts and feelings and lessons that I've gained, not only from the subject alone, but how it has influenced the way that I've learned and experienced things throughout the term and in other things. So for today, I will go through really quickly the three different modules that we've had in class, other activities that we had, poems and short stories that we've read, short videos, theater productions, seminars, and talks that I attended, and lastly, just reflections of me as a student and other things that I want to share about this whole course. So to start it off, just a few weeks ago while I was working on this reflection, I came across this TED Talk called What Really Matters at the End of Life by B.J. Miller. And just to summarize that talk really quickly, during his sophomore year in college, he ended up riding this train with his friends, like climbing up on top of a train. And because he was wearing a watch, this watch actually hit the live wires of where the train was passing by and ended up electrocuting him, rendering him paralyzed and also disabled because he lost his arm and limbs. So he uses prosthetics during that time. And the reason why I wanted to start off with that TED Talk as my introduction is because he was talking about winter and how so many of the nurses there were complaining about how difficult it was to get to the hospital. And during that time, his room was not accessible, so he could not even see the fact that it was snowing outside. And when he expressed his thoughts to his nurse, out of the blue, the nurse gave him a snowball. And he recalled that by holding this snowball in his hand reminded him of life and what it meant to truly exist in this universe, regardless or not if he could make it out alive from there. So now, he works as a doctor for people at the end of their lives. But he talked about a lot of experiences, which I will get back to later. But for now, the reason why I wanted to start with that is because he brought up that we're all patients in life. We don't have to be admitted in a hospital. We don't have to get diagnosed with a certain disease or disorder to be considered a patient, because the core meaning of what it is to be a patient is someone who suffers. And I think that at the core of that, being human is suffering, but not shedding light on it on a negative perspective, but how it teaches a lot of values, which I also gained from the different modules, which I will be starting now. Hi! So for our very first module, it would be the national and the global, or what I will label it as, what does it mean to be a citizen or member of society? And to start us off, I also have a class called Gender and Society. And one of the texts that we encountered early on in the term that really shaped my view of culture is one called The Politicization of Gender by Susan B. Wright. So she gives you a new and updated meaning of what culture is. So she stated that cultural identities are not inherent, bounded, or static. Instead, it is dynamic, fluid, and constructed situationally in particular places and time. Cultures are not, nor were they ever, naturally bounded entities. So it shows to you that culture is dynamic. And it's because society and culture captures people and individuals who are also very much dynamic and they change over time. I think in the past decade, there has been rapid increase of advancements in technology, in health, and even in education, especially in the face of COVID. There were so many different adjustments to be made so that society wouldn't collapse in the face of a really dangerous pandemic. But going back to literature and all the different texts that we encountered, it does show to you that even with this understanding that because humans are dynamic, that it will also make culture dynamic, you can still see that there's some rigidity in the way things have been. So this brings us to takeaway number one, which states that even with the dynamic aspect of culture, individuals end up complying with fixed and set norms because it regulates society. It ensures that things are placed in balance and behavior gets regulated. It provides a safe space to back upon because it is easier to comply than it is to challenge things that have been. So the reason why I wanted to talk about that is because one of the texts that really spoke to me this term would be The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. Even with the menu text provided and videos, it was really in that text that showed to me how powerful norms are and regulating activities. So the story of the lottery is it was a regular day in an American countryside, and at the start of the story you could see glimpses of everyday life, people cooking, kids playing in the open space, and individuals who come together for a lottery. And we know that lottery they promise a reward, usually a cash prize or incentive. But this lottery does provide that, but it is exercised in a different way. The lottery is a way so that the countryside or this community that we are talking about ends up having crop and a bounty of harvest for the whole community to benefit from. The only cost that it takes is one of chance of every individual participating in this lottery, and two, the life of whoever does get drawn. So this activity is regulated by Mr. Summer, who shows up all clean and tidy, enacting it like a meeting for everyone to come together. And one of the characters there, old man Warner, who has participated for this for 76 times, this one being the 77th, he mentioned that the lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. And when there were certain individuals in the community who tried to go against this, or questioning it, he mentioned that people are not the way that they used to be. So, for someone who's risked their lives, who's taken a chance to be drawn 77 times, he believes it to be what's right. So, this just shows to you that it's so much easier to comply and to follow set rules, even if it's at the cost of other people. And even if it's something that could be questioned or even be put up to discussion, because it's something that is easier to believe upon than it is to make things new in society. Especially now, when we talk about implementing policies and different activities on a national level, you would really find that there is difficulty because people are so rigid in their thinking, and people want to maintain things the way it is than to uproot these problems and understand them better and in a more holistic way possible. So this brings us to my takeaway number 2, strictly again on norms, that the power of social norms, most especially injunctive norms, dictate behavior, and literature has the power to illustrate the difference of what it means to be an observer and what it means to be a participant. So when you are a reader and you see this text for yourself, you really get shocked that there's so many people who are willing to follow this rule because it will promise everyone a better community, even if there is no support for it. But it is easy for me to say that because I am an outsider and an observer. And I think that when people tap into that side of themselves as an outsider or observer, it could make challenging norms easier, especially from my takeaway number 1. I think that challenging norms now, having healthy and productive conversations about what society has been doing for the past few years, could help shape better conversations, better stories, and better narratives. But at the end of the day, because these things have been so embedded in how we work, that it would really take some time and it would really take some challenges. So this also comes up not only for what is, but what could be. Because another thing that I realized from this takeaway is that literature gives you the ability to dream and to envision a world, but it also grounds you to show you that what we envision things to be will always have a setback or will always be grounded in the reality that we face. And I want to illustrate that point better in one of the texts called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula de Guin. Yes. So from this text, it was what I always thought the future would look like. Something dystopian, perfect, where there are celebrations happening on the streets are clean, that everyone comes together. And I always thought that the future would have flying cars or perfect systems in place where health is protected and sacred, that we eradicate so many different systemic problems. But when you dive deep into the story, it shows that there was a child who is prisoned underground. And when people get to witness and see it for themselves, the only thing that they choose to do is to leave Omelas. So it really shows to you that even in the face of this grand goal or grand dream that one may hold, may it be for a certain institution or for a certain community or certain cultural entity, is that there is always this humanity of following and complying that would root someone to still put something in place, such as having a child as a sacrifice in order to appease gods or appease certain entities in the universe that could help them maintain it as it is. When in reality, it is not sacrifice like that that will make things function. It is about implementing better policies and guidelines, restructuring how education is, structuring the kinds of information that are broadcasted on social media and technology. It's about regulating and understanding why social problems exist and what kinds of structures perpetuate those kinds of injustices. But instead, we still go back to an old style view that it is sacrifice or it is a norm of giving something up for some promise when it's all supposed to be solved by action and problem solving and critical thinking. And then this brings me to my last takeaway for this module, which is that the best of humanity transpires in the negotiation between goodness and wrong. And on a more macro scale, the negotiation between people in power and subordinates, and negotiation between hosts and international culture. So, one of the texts that we read was Just Lather, That's All by Hernando Tellez, which talks about a barber who happens to be part of the opposition as well, and how he had to enact a very ordinary routine of shaving someone's beard who happens to be the general or the military man in power who happens to be killing people in the community where he was a part of. And the reason why that text was so powerful for me was because you could see that internal conflict that he was experiencing. And I actually want to read a part of that text that made me think about it so deeply. I don't want to be a murderer, no sir. You came to me for a shave, and I perform my work honorably. I don't want blood on my hands. Just lather, that's all. You are an executioner, and I am only a barber. Each person has his own place in the scheme of things. That's right, his own place. And I think what's so promising about this is that when there is this expectation of you to do a certain thing because of what norms have placed on you, that in crossing these boundaries or in trying to explore your inner thoughts and feelings, you end up deciding for yourself. So, as you can see, even if from the outside, other rebellions would encourage the barber to end up killing the general because he had him in such a vulnerable position, you can see that he still stick to his humanity and his values of integrity and honesty and truth. And you could still see that, literature shows us that even at the worst of times, even when you're faced with a struggle or a challenge, is that within us we experience a struggle and conflict and tension that would help us decide what is right and what is wrong on our own terms. And it is that line of choosing between what is right and what's wrong where the most powerful and the most personal lessons that one has accumulated over time that could truly help you reach and tap into your core as a human and the values that you prioritize in life. And just to close this off, we also had a lot of really interesting texts, like not stories but a text. This is by David Damsroch, who talked about world literature and national context. And he said that reading and studying world literature inherently involves a mode of detached engagement. We enter into a different kind of dialogue with the work, and not necessarily involving identification or mastery, but a discipline of distance and difference. When you do receive a work and you hear the author of that work, it's so easy for us to label it as, oh, this text is from Mexico, or this text is from South America, or from China or Singapore, and it prioritizes distance and difference and a separation between the reader and the text. But I do think that by reaching into your internal understanding of yourself and the different values that you can gain from just reading a certain text, is that it teaches you so much more than just by focusing on that difference, and hopefully results into the fusion of horizons, which was mentioned in the same text, that Friedrich Schleiermacher envisioned, that hopefully when we encounter a distant text, that we may actually experience our customary horizon being set askew under the influence of works whose foreignness remains fully in view. So I do think that by stepping out of a box that we've placed upon ourselves and the different things that we consume and read and watch online, we can actually transcend beyond these boundaries that we've arbitrarily placed in our heads, and instead teach us about different cultures and different experiences and stories of people that you've never encountered, but because of these texts we get to learn about what their life has been or what they want to impart or contribute to the world, which I do think is the core of studying literature. It's being exposed to different narratives and different stories that pushes you out of your boundaries so that you could be aware of the injustices and the realities that others face, and hopefully inspire you to do something, to do an action, to have an answer that you may not be able to put in place in their countries or in their own culture, but hopefully in yours, in your own sphere, in your own community. And I do think that having your horizon set askew, having that box removed, and having your boundaries, having these set norms of what things should be, when you get the opportunity, as I mentioned, to challenge it on the first time, it teaches you so much. It enriches your life, and it gives so much power for these texts, not to control or not to dictate, but to teach and to help you tap into a humanity that you have as a person. So, hi everyone. So, I'm back again. And sadly, some of my videos did not record the same day. So, it's a new day, and that's fine. And right now, we'll be talking about the second module. So, module 2 is about the colonial past and the post colonial present, or at least for me, what it means to be human and sensitive to others. So, straight away, I'll be jumping into my first takeaway, which states that literature is a key to examining our private world and assessing our biases and stereotypes of others. Literature helps us expose the narrative and imagery that we have of other nationalities and identities. And this gives me the personal question, how do we make sense of this divide? And now, more than ever, it is a crucial time in our history where we could see segregation and separation get highlighted and promoted, especially with the topics of war and conflict in Palestine and Israel. And when the news broke out for me, I remember watching it on CNN and seeing so many of the reporters give you a glimpse of how war looked like modern times. And it was really so crushing to the spirit to see that so many kids are having terrible childhoods. So many families are losing loved ones, and seeing how much destruction it has caused for a certain community, and how so much of history and culture get ruined because of war. And I remember that when I was watching it, there was one video posted on their social media that got posted, and it was about a woman protesting the war that was going on. But she was also challenging the CNN reporters that were on site. And she was saying and asking them if the reports will really be reported, and if her interview was really going to be posted without any edits or modifications to fit a story that they want to broadcast to the media and to the general public. And one of the lines that she said that I am very much impacted and reminded of all the text that we read was she was saying that to the reporter that you own the narrative and you own our stories and that you own our voice that gets broadcasted to the world. And I do think that these reporters go in at such a vulnerable and dangerous time. But once that they do get out of that situation, that they have so much power and that they hold so much influence about what kind of stories do get influenced and get spread as common information or accepted truths. So one of the texts that we had for this class was called Telephone Conversation by Wole Soyinka. And it really shows to you the power of conversations and words. Jumping on from that interview of the woman and the reporter, now we have an ordinary man asking for a place to rent from this white woman. And you can see that because of his identity being discussed at the start, it became a point of reference for the woman to have a judgment of this person without even looking at objective information like their background, their work, their education, and other qualifiers that we use to give someone an opportunity or a chance. It also shows to you that in this communication method, how powerful silence can be, how in a short amount of time that we receive an information, it is already so crucial for us to develop an impression or judgment of others, even without seeing them. And another part of this conversation from the poem highlighted color and how for this woman, it was so easy for her to categorize someone as black or white or brown, as easy as it is for us to see a stoplight as red, yellow, and green. But as you can see, he was mentioning so many different words. He was saying that he had sepia tones, that he was a brunette, and he was saying that although he is black, he has so many colors within himself that get muted and that get disregarded because of this woman. And at the end, you could see that there is this declaration of red, which represents their anger and their hostility and the injustice that they feel, that it burns inside them like blood and it spills from them as red. But again, as the story progresses for this, as much as he was enraged and as much as he was disappointed and segregated according to color by not giving him an opportunity, it was still the protagonist or the voice of the story who wishes to be given another chance. And, you know, being exposed to this kind of text made me realize how powerful simple conversations can be in shaping our realities and images of others. So this gave me a chance to actually search for another concept that I found from South Africa and all of these writers, and made me see glimpses of the apartheid in South Africa. So the word apartheid is an African word that meant apartness or being separate. And on law and on paper, it was a call for equal development and freedom of cultural expression. However, it became a method and a way that different racial groups were made to live separately, and that you should not be seen with another racial group or entity in that community, or else you'll get penalized for it. And it's sad because even within their own communities, they get segregated and they get differentiated on the basis of their culture and their race and also the color. This brings me to another text, although not mentioned. I really did read a lot of poems from these communities, one of which is Nothing's Changed by Tatamkhulu Africa, which talks about the environment. It shows that there is an apartness in how the blacks experience their lives compared to the whites. And I do think that the environment is also crucial in shaping our biases of others, because that is what we associate them with. Aside from just color or how they look like, we also associate their potentials and their dreams with the environment that they have, what kind of workplace opportunities they get, what kind of education do they receive, and what kind of livelihood they have, like what kind of homes they're exposed to, which in reality is not always the best. It's not always holistic for their health and development as a community and as individuals. So, words and silence play a role, and environment as well shapes our perceptions of them. So, on the other hand, on the side of these people who are experiencing these injustices, you could see that dreams and potentials get crushed. And this was shown in the poem Harlem by Langston Hughes, which shows you a depiction of what their dreams would be, that they do get dried up or they get crushed because of the different injustices that they experience. Another which is the way to live, what kind of script they have to follow. And I am really so shocked that there has to be a poem, or that there has to be a text that empowers them or instructs them to just be proud of themselves, because you don't see that in text for the Western culture, because most of them focuses on pride and glory and ego. But here, they're given instructions on how to live. And this was seen in the poem called The Primer for Blacks by Gwendolyn Brooks, which also shows you the power of the conversation and of color, and also of dreams to Harlem. So I want to read an excerpt of this poem, The Primer for Blacks. And it was really so eye-opening about them. So one of it was this that really spoke to me. Blackness stretches over the land, blackness, the black of it, the rust red of it, the milk and cream of it, the tan and yellow tan of it, the deep brown, middle brown, high brown of it, the olive and the ochre of it. The blackness marches on. And it shows to you that there are so many variations to their skin color, which is often just labeled as black, and how it stretches over the lands, and it should be marched on, it should be rallied upon. And I do think that it does show you the homage to the color that was also presented in the telephone conversation, and also to Harlem about their dreams, that they need to rally upon themselves to this call so that they could actualize their own potential. So my second takeaway is the single narrative, what it means to be open to multiple stories, and ultimately how truth gets broadcasted in the face of untold stories, quiet versions of well accepted versions of the truth, and how truth manages in the face of stereotypes and biases. So one of the texts or one of the videos that we were exposed to is called The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who talked about his experiences of one of their helpers at home, and how for the longest time, because this helper was always branded as someone who was poor, that was the image that he had or she had of him, until she met them and realized how much she only conceived of one story for that person. She also talked about her college experiences, about how her roommates had this one image of being Nigerian, and how this limited their view of herself as well. That they were surprised that she could cook and that she is actually civilized, or that she knows these kinds of things, or her preferences for music. And it's sad that from literature into real life, they've always been seen as uncivilized, or people that do not exist within society, and how it taught her a valuable lesson that even she is subject to this, but she can also subject others to that kind of judgment. When she went to Mexico, and she talked about how when she went there, she was thinking of the separateness that she had with them because of the Great Wall that was being built during that time. So one of the things that she mentioned was the concept of Nikali, that single stories happen because one wishes to be greater than another. And one of the texts that she mentioned was from the Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti, who stated that if you want to dispossess a group of community, the simplest way to do it is through their story. And to start with secondly. And in secondly, it's all the different stories of their dreams and achievements and glory as a community that gets washed away because of the single story. Another video that we got exposed to was I'm Not Poor, I'm Black, which talks about the workplace and how so many individuals were judging this one office mate for being black, but instead transcending beyond that, labeling him as poor or unfortunate or someone who does not have resources, even though he lives with these people in the same village or the same area. And you could really see how pervasive these beliefs are, that the way it really says a lot about the way that they treat others. And this gives me, like, these two videos shows you the different sides of the single story, that there is someone who even gets subjected to it will also do the same for others. But you also have the video of what it looks like as an outsider to see it happen for yourself, when someone gets scrutinized for just one thing, always focusing on one thing. And this gave me an understanding of reading more about Mourid Barghouti, who got mentioned in that talk, The Danger of a Single Story. And just a little background about him before I talk about some of his poems that I was able to read. There was this article about him and an interview about him, and he was born in 1944, which characterizes a violent displacement and dispossession of the Palestinians in 1948. So when he was 4 years old, there was this phenomenon that was happening similar to the apartheid, but instead is called Nakba, which is basically the dispossession of the Palestinians, where they got displaced in their own country and they were having difficulties when it comes to economic opportunities and their ownership of their own lands and heritage. And he said that there is no Palestinian family that hasn't paid the price. Losing someone, being jailed, houses getting demolished. If our price is just separation, it's endurable. Let us not exaggerate. But as you can see, from then and even until now, so many families have lost a loved one. They have lost their lives entirely, their education, their work, their opportunity for having a peaceful community to live in. And some of the poems that display this were I Have No Problem by Mourid Barghouti, which was the very first poem that I was able to see of him when I was also searching about just their experiences and how they were all so exposed to this at such a young age and ultimately shape the way that they view the world. So I just want to read an excerpt of I Have No Problem by Mourid Barghouti. So it goes like this. The smell of the TV anchor does not make me ill anymore, and I've got used to the khaki stopping my colors night and day. That is why I keep my identification papers on me even at the swimming pool. I have no problem. So you could see that the person not in this poem tries so hard to say that there shouldn't be a problem, that there are extra steps that one has to make to protect oneself in the face of these difficult and very crucial moments. Another poem that he had is called The Midnight Poems from his collection of poetry while he was exiled as well. So this poem, Midnight, talks about seeing a dead loved one again in your dreams. And that's what he said. He went on staring at the emptiness, and I said, "What shall we do after the soldiers leave? What will he do after the soldiers leave?" He slowly clenched his fist, recapturing a boxer's resolve in his right hand. His coarse bronze hand, the hand which has tamed the thorny slope, the hand which holds his hoe lightly and with ease like prayer, his hand which can split a tree stump with a single blow, his hand open for forgiveness, his hand closed on sweets to surprise his grandchildren, his hands amputated years ago. And I do think that this highlights the loss that one experiences in these really violent times. That someone who could display so much strength and so much determination will ultimately be tamed and will ultimately be lost. It becomes a memory than a reality because in the strength and the corresponding gentleness that you have within your soul to forgive and to understand is that you're left with the ruins of what comes next or what one should do because of the different injustices that these individuals face. It's very disheartening to see that people get exposed to this at such a young age. And this gives me to the last poem that I got in researching, which is called Silence by Mourid Barghouti, which stated that silence said the truth needs no eloquence. After the death of the horseman, the homeward bound horse says everything without saying anything. I do think when you remove the narratives or the narrations held in our screens, when the world goes silence and you just see all of these events, all the destruction and the catastrophe that we are even seeing right now at this time, it shows to you the truth of the lives that have been lost, the stories that will become unheard, and all the different people who will be forever ruined by these imbalances of power, this desire to subject others to be subordinates and to rally for justification of killing and murder and the death of so many people. But this poem promises that the truth always prevails, and it happens even at the ruins. As I said there, like, even at the death of the horseman, the horse will say everything without saying anything. I do think that there is this negated history and this destruction that we're so accustomed to. But you can see that in these works that they do not want to just be identified with these, but instead they also want to be identified for their strength and for their gentleness and for the stories that they have that isn't ruined by the war and destruction, and shows you the strength that they display in the face of it. Then lastly, my takeaway number 3 is about hegemony. So there was a video that was played, and it talked about hegemony, which started off in Greece, talking about military dominance and physical and geopolitical control. But one of the philosophers, Antonio Gramsci, developed this ideology how social classes come to dominate society. So power is not about physical but cultural domination, which is something that is very much pervasive now in our society. And one of the things that the video stated was that power is not through physical but through the stories that we tell and the images that we make, something that I've been talking about the last few minutes. And this gave me this idea to read more about Gramsci's thoughts, and the paper that I came across to was Revisiting Hegemony, a Gramscian analysis for contemporary social work. And for Gramsci, he stated that rather, it was not such crude economic facts that unveiled true hegemony. Instead, it is that man themselves and the societies that they create as they learn to live with one another and understand one another. And it's quite sad that by being exposed to other people, it also teaches you the other side of subjecting people to power by wanting to rule over a specific community. And he said that hegemony is not about just economic injustices or the maldistribution of resources or culture. It exceeds that, and it's about the lived experience of the ideology. It's not about the concept of hegemony as subjecting dominance over another group, but it's also about what happens to these people when you do subject them to subordination. Because ultimately in this text, it was said that because some minorities have this idea of themselves that has been broadcasted, they eventually end up accepting themselves. So when the paper also states that hegemony is also not just the subordination or the domination of a certain group, but it also talks about this quiet consent that happens, that ultimately individuals end up accepting the kind of images or stereotypes they're held upon themselves. The book, or this paper rather, talked about understanding how certain minorities do get accepted of this image. But I do think, at least for myself, that there is no such thing as a quiet consent to this. I do think that these images and stereotypes of others become so pervasive and so widely accepted as the truth that there's no contesting it anymore. And overall, this whole module was very much enlightening and enriching, and it really shows to you how powerful the text we are exposed to, but more importantly, what kind of thinking and what kind of mindset that we have to come up with conclusions and judgments of others. Okay, so for our last module, it is body, mind, and desire. And I think I'll label it as what it means to live. And what I want to discuss here are a lot of human experiences that I have personally experienced, and how these texts help me understand and process it better, especially now that I'm at an older age versus for the time that I initially experienced them. So for the very first takeaway, we will focus on loss and grief. And one of the productions that we watched was Dear Evan Hansen, which is a very famous and popular play. And it's very much scrutinized by the public or by critics. But I do think that once you actually go through that, it will really feel very personal and you will feel so seen. And before I dive into the play itself, I do think that this play is very much important because when I was grade 11 back in senior high, I actually did lose a friend to suicide. And when that happened, it was also the time that this play came up. And one of the songs that was played in my friend's funeral was You Will Be Found. And I could remember how heartbreaking and how lost you feel when you go through an experience like that, and how easy it is to just sit there and to feel that way, especially since most of us at that time were just 17. And I did realize that then we barely had any idea of these things. Yes, we were learning a lot about school and learning about biology, chemistry, physics, because I was STEM. But then it made you realize how unaware you are of life experiences. And I do think that it was a very much awakening of all of my friends, including myself, in terms of maturity and emotions and grief and understanding. Although I didn't have the best understanding of it years ago, I do think that now, at this age, I have developed a better understanding. Because just to add to that, I also did lose my dad last year. So I do think that these two experiences were better understood by watching the production and actually just sitting there and listening deeply to the conversations and the songs. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was that. So my takeaway about body, mind, and desire in the context of loss and grief is that grief is an uninvited guest to birthday parties, celebrations, and milestones. But it lives in the attic of one's mind and takes a permanent position by a small window. In that window, a small light peeks on it during morning, but darkness embraces it as well. By embracing grief, we allow a certain lightness in. That's acceptance. And the refusal to sit down with grief is an unbearable anguish and refusal to human frailty and fragility. I think that when we experience these kinds of losses in our lives, the very first level is on a bodily experience, how we cry and we grieve and we feel it on a physical level. And the next level that we have would be our minds, how tormented and tortured we end up getting, not only at the particular event but even past that. And that desire to either choose to deny or to choose to accept. And I do feel like there is this pool of emotions that we have to ride through and understand before we even reach that final level of acceptance. Because these experiences, they are understood through time, through the text that we read, through the materials we get exposed to. Just like Dear Evan Hansen, their song number called Requiem was very powerful for me. I think that is really one of the best ways of capturing what it is to lose someone. It's not just one particular picture of grief. It showed you that it looks so different for each person, and it always looks different at different points of your life. It's dynamic, it grows with you, and I do think that you will never lose that feeling, because it's always there. You'll always get reminded of it in the most simple moments of your life. So that's one of my takeaways for this. Next is our takeaway number 2 on sexuality and the body. So the Vagina Monologues were a series of videos that we had to watch, and I think my main takeaway from that production was that society lives a lot in our heads and our minds. Actual or imagined, we allow others to dictate how we live, control our thoughts, and decide the way that we view our body. We taint something as natural as our human body to be objectified even in our own terms. It becomes a concept than reality. Hearing all of the women talk about their vagina and hearing about how they saw their own sexuality, seeing that everyone is so shy and adamant in discussing it, even if it's something that can be discussed, I do think it's because of how we viewed it. And it's very, very disappointing to see that we know that women get objectified on media in every day and in their different experiences. But it's also these women that who can even talk about their bodies and the state of it and how they experience and feel pleasure or happiness or being uncomfortable. Because when you keep these conversations closed and not in the air, it makes it difficult for even women to talk about their health when it comes to being a woman, bearing a child, difficulties in our periods, and other different diagnoses when it comes to our reproductive health, especially now that it's such a important concept to talk about. It just affects the way that services get administered for women. So on a concept that we have of it, it also affects the services that we have, the experiences that we have with other people, and how it eventually taints the relationships that we have with others. And then a lot of the women, you could just see it in their faces how they've never had the opportunity to discuss it. And I really am grateful that there was a text such as the Vagina Monologues that could bring it up to the open. And then our last takeaway, it's about love and dreams, which is this: the desire to belong matters more than the desire to dream and to live. It is a silent destruction that starts from within. And I got this because of the play The Last 5 Years, which I also encountered when I was younger. And how from the surface it just looks like a love story of a marriage falling apart. But then now that you could see it at this lens, you could see that the relationships that we have internally can dictate the world, our experiences, and our journey. And I do think that it is important that we learn to have a peaceful relationship with our minds, with our bodies, with the way that we process things, because it would really help us dictate what kind of life we want to live and what kind of person we want to be at the end of the day. So that is my takeaways for this module. And then next, we have the different classes and activities that we have. So one of the first activities that we had was an alternate class for martial law viewing, and it was because of the martial law anniversary, which is often celebrated in DLSU, and I'm really glad that I got to participate in that every year, even during the pandemic. And there was a forum on that, and one of the things that really struck me about that time was a lot of the panelists who talked about it had very honest and brutal thoughts about it. And I feel like it's because in the Philippines, we still experience this side that we want to keep, that we don't want our wounds to be shown, that there is no acceptance that an experience such as this actually happened for a lot of Filipinos. And my takeaway with that is history records how communities are embedded with the awareness of social injustices and inequalities through the social volcano and social consciousness. I think that even with this denial, when you go out to the communities and societies, you can see how Filipinos are very much advocates, and they will rally for what is right, for human rights, for the lives of others, because they know firsthand what it's like to be subjected to difficulties in life. And I think that it was very much moving to see how we have this collective nature. We are a culture that thrives because of community, and how if we do come together, it is such a powerful tool, and it is something that could help us understand the different problems that we have of society. Another activity that I enjoyed was about the hero's journey, which is basically like a set standards that a lot of literature text and books follow, which gives you an idea of how a story progresses. And from there, we talked about Nosedive, which is an episode from Black Mirror, and it was really inspiring to watch that again after so long, and to be just shocked that when you do watch these episodes, it gets sad that you can see our society being so influenced by technology, and that our journeys get distorted at the end of that. We have a point of comparison, we have a reference for measuring our worth, and we end up feeling short of ourselves, even though that shouldn't be the case. And the topic on the hero's journey, not only through this episode but even in class, when there was an example of college and going through the entrance exams and your different challenges and your thesis, and then how the real and the outside world is your new journey to face. It was also comforting to see at least myself as a character that goes through different challenges, because it means that all the difficulties that I might be facing is also coupled with learnings and a lot of mentors who will guide you along the way. And then the last activity, which was on poetry, where we had a sandbox activity as a group, where we had to understand the poem called Fire and Museo debut arts by W.H. Auden. And my biggest takeaway there is that from history on a macro level, moving forward or inward to your individual journey, is that in comparison and in relation with others, we are definitely just a bystander of the sufferings of others. We can go about our day, going to school, attending classes, working our requirements, being so unaware, and being so blind to the suffering of others could happen in your own home, not knowing the full story of what your mom has gone through, or even your brother or sister. Most especially the strangers that you meet on campus, in the mall, or in different spaces that you usually live in. I think that that session made me reflect a lot about kindness and what it means to extend our compassion to other people, because we all have a suffering to bear, we all have crosses to carry, and I think that if we align ourselves with that kind of thinking, it could teach us how to be more sensitive to others. So that is what I have for different activities that we had. Okay, so what does this mean to me as a student or as a person? How do I see these learnings and insights from GELIT contributing to my development as an individual and member of society? So I think number one is expanding one's understanding by going back to the basics. A lot of our lecture focused on the basics of poetry and fiction and understanding perspectives and conflict and the progression of stories. And I do think that by coming back to the basics, even as I graduate now, was a good way of understanding these things. That sometimes all you need is a simple and unfiltered view of the text that you read and how this could cascade into the different things. Because I think that by simplifying everything, it allows us to resonate and understand things better, and it will really expand your view by coming back to the basics and fully comprehending if you do understand it on that level. And number two, in work, disability and single narratives. So right now we have a lot of discussion on race and gender, but I do want to talk about the experience of disability and single narratives. So right now I do work part-time as operations head for a nonprofit organization called Best Buddies Philippines, and it is a nonprofit that serves individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I've gained a lot of experiences from this, not only by interacting with a lot of our members who do have these disabilities, but seeing how individuals perceive it, especially considering that in my line of work, a lot of it is having inclusive work-based trainings conducted with others, especially with companies and other corporations who are doing efforts for their CSR. And I do think that after being a part of it for almost a year already, was also an awakening for me of how much we have just a single view of everything. Because here, when you think of disability, we always think about someone in a wheelchair or someone that is physically handicapped. But by working with individuals with these diversities, it teaches you that there are people who suffer in silence and that they're not properly accommodated into society because people cannot understand that they can't see the disability for themselves. And in pitching to different companies about it, you could really see that in our world today, we really do value contribution, what it means to profit from a certain service, and how much money we can get in. But being able to understand a world wherein my actions and my work has actual impact on the lives of others made me always sit back and reflect what kind of narrative I want to share of the beneficiaries that I interact with, or what kind of story I want them to be hearing. Because when you do these workshops and trainings with them, I end up having the power of shaping what kind of understanding they have of disability, but most especially the lived experiences of these individuals. And it was truly through the classes of having a single story of stereotypes and biases that made me take a step back and evaluate if whatever story I have of others is properly processed and shared in the most honest and authentic way possible. And I do hope that in the future that there will be a sensitivity to disability, because a significant portion of the population is affected by it. And I do think now is the time to start accommodating them, because we lose a lot of potential and we lose a lot of talents because of that. And last takeaway is lifelong learning. There were so many times I felt very much stressed out, thinking about the next thing, the next requirement, or the next thesis deadline. But I remember throughout the term, when I sit down on Sunday reading these poems, I get to spend time a bit and hearing the stories from people that I never knew existed, and seeing how this fits or how this can teach me a valuable lesson really just made me just love learning and just enjoy the experience of being a student so much more. So that is something I would like to share for what it is for me, what's next for me. And I do think one of the things that I do want to share, or like suggestions, I came across this YouTube channel called The Soft White Underbelly, wherein they focus on different stories of people who are considered minorities in society. And something I noticed in our class, when you look at the students and other classmates, you could always see that no one has the patience to read anymore, or no one has the patience to sit down through a production and to listen it for its entirety. And as someone who enjoys doing that, I'm very much lucky that these things are not as difficult or something that I don't feel like a burden on doing. But I do feel like majority of the students that I encounter nowadays don't have that patience anymore. So one of the things I want to share is that maybe by exposing people to stories through that kind of format, like an interview format, might develop patience, and in turn can also develop empathy and listening, because I think that these skills would really help these students relate to these texts more. So I do think that being exposed to other materials like soft white underbelly would definitely help. Okay, so just to conclude, this class was really informative, and it was an opportunity for me to sit down and actually think a lot about the world outside of me, but the world inside of me too. And I know that I talked about that the different experiences, from a global perspective going down to a national perspective when it comes like to martial law and different experiences, and also my personal experiences. And I do think that we're all patients because we all suffer, but it is definitely in suffering and all the different injustices that teaches you something and moves you to do something about it. So I want to end this video blog, which I feel like is already running really long, by reading a portion of a poem that I just heard this week on the radio. It's called On Joy and Sorrow by Khalil Gibran. And one of the lines that really hit me there was, the deeper the sorrow carves into your being, the more joy that you contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? And it is not the lute that soothes your spirit, the very wood that was hollowed with knives. When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. And I think that it is very much promising to hear this text and this poem during this period that is not only written by so much injustice outside, but also a period for me with transition and change that will truly remind me and invite me to sit down with peace, to sit down with my suffering, and to transcend beyond those, to experience joy and authenticity, because we've been given an opportunity to live meaningful life. The best way to live that is by making meaning of the different kinds of suffering that we have. So yeah, that concludes my video blog. Thank you so much for sitting down and listening until this point. I do hope that you appreciate it, and I do hope that, when I do go back to this time, that I would be much proud of myself, and I hope that I get to develop these reflections more when I revisit it. That's all. Thank you.